Hello, America. As promised, today, 17 September 2018, I will reveal a conspiracy rooted in our government to conceal the poisoning of America with lead from guns and the over 40 other toxic compounds produced by firearms and weapons used by our government. In the previous videos, we laid the groundwork exposing some of the evidence documenting our government aware and acknowledging this poisoning. All of those documents are available online and easily accessible. Do they prove conspiracy to conceal? Not on their own. First, let's take a look at a few laws that establish negligence before we move on to conspiracy to conceal. Federal Law 29 U.S.C. 654, Section 5 states, each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. We have established the government and its agencies recognize the hazard of lead and lead poisoning from guns to employees, civilians, their families, and the environment. 2. Each employer shall comply with occupational safety and health standards promulgated under this Act. Those standards are defined in the OSHA 29 Code of Federal Regulations. The government, as an employer, is required to comply with this law. This section of 29 CFRs dictates that the government, as an employer, is required to adhere to the law to keep employees safe from the recognized hazard of lead poisoning at their place of employment except for construction or agricultural operations. This section applies for construction, demolition, removal, alteration, renovation, repair, emergency lead cleanup, transportation, disposal, storage, or containment of lead or materials containing lead at the site. This section identifies the government as the prime contractor responsible to ensure contracted employees are also safe from lead working in 29 CFR governed operations. You see, the government hires contractors to perform work exposed to lead poisoning. It does not matter whether the contracted company adheres to the law or not. The government, as the prime contractor, is responsible to ensure the employee's safety and the contracted company adhering to the law. Why is this important? Because at the government agency I worked for, we employed government personnel from other government agencies and contractors not in any lead programs required by law for them to work with lead, firing weapons, cleaning up, and performing operations defined under the 1910-1025 and 1926-62 regulations. My agency was responsible for all of their safety in executing the mandatory regulations they failed to execute. Federal law states the employer is required to test a place of employment and ensure it free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. If lead is detected, the employer is required to inform all affected employees within 15 or 5 days. Then a whole new set of laws go into effect to train and protect them from further harm. The employee then has the right to request access to medical and other services. That's not what the government is doing. How do I know this? They did not notify us we were exposed. Therefore, they did not train us or execute the remainder of the requirements of federal law. They simply did not test our place of employment as required by federal law. I was a GS-11 government employee. I had been suffering lead poisoning symptoms and requested access to medical services. I was denied those services and informed by my supervisors I was not exposed to lead at my place of employment. In 2013, I discovered a 2011 report documenting lead in my place of employment. My supervisors had lied and failed to notify me of my exposure. I began whistleblowing. As a result, I was fired for whistleblowing after it had been determined I had been poisoned at the extremely high level of 66 micrograms per deciliter of blood. Over the next 3 years, Freedom of Information Act requests would expose further concealed reports documenting the government aware it was poisoning employees at my place of work and concealing their exposure to lead just like they had me. I exposed that my supervisors and safety officials had conspired and falsified official government documents to conceal and cover up our poisoning and their actions. I exposed that they had conspired to terminate me for whistleblowing and produce falsified statements and documents to do so as early as 2010. They were using them to defame and discredit me to senior staff and deny my promotion without my knowledge. I exposed they had concealed and presented falsified documents to their supervisors, federal investigators, and to a federal judge during a federal hearing. I exposed that the agency had presented fraudulent documents to federal investigators and a federal judge to maintain the cover-up. I exposed that multiple government supervisors conspired to produce false statements and commit perjury during a federal hearing. I exposed conspiracy and fraud against the government and the people of the United States to conceal our poisoning from firearms. I have exposed much more. What did I do with this information? I reported it, providing evidence of violations of multiple federal laws to 3 admirals and the agency's inspector general. I exposed a deputy inspector general, then produced a fraudulent report to maintain the cover-up. Why did she do that? And why did the admirals ignore it? In accordance with agency and Department of Defense regulations and federal law, they are all complicit because for years they ignored their own reports, regulations, and laws that resulted in my poisoning in 2014, 4 deaths that I am aware of, and the continued poisoning and exposure of tens of thousands of federal employees and their families to the recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. From 2015 through 2017, I gave evidence of conspiracy and multiple crimes committed to cover up our poisoning and criminal behavior up through our leadership and President Donald Trump. In early 2018, I discovered more evidence implicating the Navy, Army, EPA, and Department of Defense. Some of these documents I presented to you already in earlier videos. The 2012 DoD contracted report presented by the National Council of the Academies is the most damning. The failure of the Department of Defense and government to take immediate action to protect its troops and employees after receiving this report is inexcusable and demands action and investigation by our Congress. In August 2018, I reported this and gave more evidence of conspiracy and cover-up to President Donald Trump, Secretary Mattis, the Secretaries of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. I gave them until 17 September to address it. They have failed. They have done nothing. The employees who violated the law are still employed. Our troops, employees, and their families are still being poisoned. Our nation is still being poisoned. What does this mean? President Donald Trump and his appointed agency heads are unfit to lead our armed forces and federal government. They have taken no action to protect their employees, our citizens, and the environment from the recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. President Trump should understand this better than his generals and admirals. He was the president and CEO of a billion-dollar construction firm and has been forced to deal with these laws for decades. Now, as CEO of the executive branch in charge of all government employees, he is personally responsible for their safety and the failure of his organization to comply. Why is he not taking action? Is it because in his arrogance he thinks he is above the law and can get away with it? Sound familiar? Again, let me point out, President Donald Trump is unfit to serve as Commander-in-Chief, President, and CEO of America when he takes no action to protect us, his employees and citizens, from the recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Keep your eyes on the news as I report this to Congress, the Senate, and work to expose this on cable news. StopLeadPoisoning.com will go live soon. Keep watching as I post more videos and reveal what we can do together to stop lead poisoning.